from Mr. Dalton. Mr. Dalton, would you like to ask your question related to open fields?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Please, can you answer why, when the Peterborough Development Corporation specifically designed the green open fields and recreation facilities for the benefit of the local community and residents, that permission can be granted without consultation of most of the people who live and enjoy the scenery of the area? For instance, not a single household in Canonsfield, Wainwright or Cranemore has been consulted. They live within 150 yards of the work and use the area constantly. A majority of the households written to are over half a mile away, and they are basically in Old Werrington, not New Werrington. No notices were visible during the application period, and this really disenfranchises the local population. Furthermore, the construction will be used for a minimal amount of time in each year by school pupils. I estimate about 9% of the maximum time. There has never been any threatening incidents in the past 18 years. The headmaster claims he is safeguarding the students, and I understand these points from potential threats, and yet he allows students to spend their breaks unsupervised in the Werrington Centre. There may well be a letter from parents giving permission for the young people to be allowed outside, but the headmaster cannot abdicate his responsibility in this case. If those same parents wrote and gave permission for their child to play Xbox instead of attending lessons, he presumably wouldn't allow it. It seems like one side of the school premises is a draconian fence and the other is a free-for-all in Werrington Centre. There's no consistency here. In any event, I believe that an 8-foot fence is not the solution to the issue. You don't need an 8-foot fence to stop a dog pooing when a 3-foot hedge would suffice. Furthermore, if a gunman or someone else wish to harm the students by some means, then they can shoot a gun through a mesh fence. Indeed, I think the fence achieves the opposite of what they're trying to do. Its very design keeps people out, but it also keeps the students locked in. It corrals them and they are just sitting ducks if that eventually happened. They are cornered with no means of escape by people who want to harm them because of an 8-foot fence. I would also ask, what does this teach our young people growing up? You need to be imprisoned to protect you from other human beings. We're all going through some form of isolation and imprisonment now. Let's not impose more on our young people. I would ask the council members if they agree that it's worth just pausing this project and sort of considering alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton. Councillor Hazel, would you like to respond, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to respond in general terms, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Dalton, for your lengthy question, but there were myriad points that you made there, Mr. Dalton, regarding children being assassinated and dogs pooing, and that's, you know, those aren't planning issues from our point of view. It does, however, give me the opportunity, I think, to just outline the planning procedure. And you mentioned consultation, Mr. Dalton, and I think that's very relevant. The publicity for this application were site notices. There were site notices, Mr. Dalton. Well, you shake your head, but there were site notices because I've been told there were site notices, and members of the public have seen site notices. So the fact that you didn't was you're not seeing them, and other people did. There was a press notice, neighbour notification letters to properties that site, which you touched on. All, I have to say, all in accordance with the requirements of current planning legislation. Werrington Neighbourhood Council was also consulted on the application, as were, of course, the ward councillors, you'll be aware. Whilst the Neighbourhood Council didn't object to the proposals, the officers' report to the committee cited that they had a number of comments, and those comments were reported to the committee. The report presented to the planning committee also stated there were nearly 200 initial consultations and that 79 representations were received, 45 in support and 39 were objecting. These are the facts as we were presented. Recognising the local interest, the application was duly called in by Councillor John Fox, and so the application was considered by the planning committee, as I said to a previous questioner, on the 10th of March this year. Councillors Mr and Mrs Fox both addressed the committee, as did two objectors, and so did the applicant, the school principal, Mr Brian Irwin. After careful consideration of the officer's report, the points raised by the ward councillors, objectors and the applicant, committee, after debate, resolved to approve the application by a majority of vote of 7 to 4 members. There's very little else I can say. I mean, we debated the issue. I must stress that the correct planning policy procedure has been followed. The committee was properly chaired and held in the presence of the council's legal officer and open to any member of the public who wished to observe proceedings. I think it also might be relevant to mention that in matters like these, Mr Dalton, the planning process pertains to consents and refusals of application. It doesn't pertain to land ownership. The land ownership is a completely separate legal matter. I hope that covers a lot of your points, Mr Dalton. I certainly haven't covered all of them, but I hope that covers the majority of them. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Excuse me for interrupting, Mr Mayor, but we have reached our 30-minute time limit for public questions, so we'll have to move on to the next item. But the questions from Ms Hudgens and Mr Hall will be responded to in writing and those answers published within the minutes of the meeting. Thank you.
Agenda